So one thing we see from a lot of people, including some libertarians, but also from certain others like the part of the left wing that's against the banking system, is that the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, is a fraud because it's not really a government bank. It's a privately owned bank masquerading as a government bank. This video isn't a refutation of any specific article or anything. This is something I've heard for decades, and I thought it's high time someone examine this in detail to see if there's any truth to it or not. One thing I'm not going to get into is the claim that the Fed was created by a secret cabal of bankers on Jekyll Island. From what I can tell, it's probably true, but it's irrelevant both to this particular subject and whether or not the Fed should exist. It just doesn't interest me. The Fed is what it is, and how it started is actually kind of irrelevant. So the first thing to consider is who created it. Regardless of what might or might not have happened on Jekyll Island, the Fed was created by Congress with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, and along with it, the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. The act also created the monetary system and legal tender laws that's still in place today. It also requires all nationally chartered banks to become members of the Fed, and all depository institutions have to keep reserves with the Fed. State-chartered banks don't have to become members of the Fed, but most of them do because that way they get access to cheap loans at the Fed's discount window. Now, it is true that Congress set up the Fed to be independent, but that isn't the same thing as being private. So to go further, we have to examine the claims they make in light of the concept of ownership and what it means to own something, which means not only having the ability to control something, but to have exclusive control. So who does have exclusive control of the Fed? Well, all of the decisions the Fed makes are made by a board of governors headed by a chairman. The Federal Reserve Act gives Congress exclusive control over the board of governors. They appoint the members and select the chairman, and the board reports to them and is directly accountable to them. So ultimately, the decision-making power is put in the hands of Congress, and the day-to-day decisions are made by congressional appointees. Another way someone could own something is to be a stockholder. The people saying the Fed is private will tell you that the 12 district banks own stock in the Fed, and so that gives them ownership. Well, generally, owning stock gives you voting rights in the corporation, but as I just pointed out, they don't have that. That's the Board of Governors that enjoys that control, and they answer to Congress and no one else. Another aspect of stocks is that you get the profits from the corporation, but these so-called stockholders don't get the profits either. In fact, the Federal Reserve, including the 12 district banks, are required by law to surrender all profits to the U.S. Treasury. They get to keep a certain amount for the next year's operating expenses, as well as a small balance to use as a surplus fund, but all of the rest of the profits go to the Treasury. In other words, the government. The district banks and their member banks do not get any of this. Another aspect of owning stock is that you can buy and sell it, but these district banks can't go to a stock exchange and buy and sell stock in the Fed to or from anyone. They can't even use it as collateral. They just have it. So if owning stock in the Fed doesn't give you any say in how it's run, and doesn't net you any of the profits from it, and doesn't give you the ability to buy or sell it, then in what sense do you really own any part of it? This is ownership in name only. None of the actual aspects of ownership apply. The funny thing is, the Federal Reserve claims they're not owned by anyone, but who gets decision-making power? Who gets the profits? Who gets to make loans based on its equity? That's all the U.S. federal government. But that raises one question. Why would they set it up this way to begin with? What's the purpose of these district banks and their so-called stocks they have in the system? To answer this, we need to look at the history of central banking in the U.S., and it goes back to the very beginning. Alexander Hamilton believed in a strong central bank. Thomas Jefferson opposed it, believing it would be a tool of political manipulation. The first Bank of the United States was established in 1791 and given a 20-year charter. When that expired in 1811, Congress failed to renew the bank under the view that it was unconstitutional. 4 years later, in 1816, the Second National Bank was established, also with a 20-year charter, and also with fierce opposition from much of the country. Its charter expired in 1836, at which point the bank became private and went bankrupt 5 years later. So we begin to see the problem. Before the Fed, no central banking system lasted more than 20 years, or 25 if you count the time the Second National Bank's been as private. Criticisms were made on constitutional grounds that only Congress had the power to coin money, and constitutionally, they can't delegate their power to other entities. Another is that it gives the government too much power to create money, which is often called legalized counterfeiting, and the inflation tax, as it's a very regressive transfer of wealth from the poor and working classes to politicians, banks, and their cronies. Another is that central banks not only have not made their goals, they can't meet their goals because the incentives are so screwed up. They have the incentive to create free credit, giving the short-term illusion of prosperity while causing problems in the long-term economy. Economist Milton Friedman felt that a much better job could be done if you replaced the Fed with a computer program. Similar complaints were made about the First and Second National Banks, although of course no one at the time had computers, but they all thought that a sound monetary system was better. Because of all of these issues, the Federal Reserve was created with the district banks and their fake stocks to give it the appearance of a private banking system. So all of these conspiracy people have it exactly backwards. The Federal Reserve is not a private bank masquerading as a government bank. It's a government bank masquerading as a private bank. And they've fallen for the masquerade. So I hope you found this video enlightening. If you did, please hit like and subscribe, and be sure to share this video everywhere you can, since smaller channels like mine are no longer showing up in related videos. You can also support this channel at donate.bogosity.tv to give a one-time donation, or become a subscriber and get my videos early. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay strong and be free.